Hello there. Welcome to episode number 44 of Coffee with Campus Consultancy. It's a bit late in the day for a coffee, you might ask. Well, you can have a coffee any time of the day that you like. And today, I've chosen to have that coffee at nearly 2 o'clock. So we had 4 amazing guests this week. And for episode number 3, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And for episode number 44, today I thought I'd do something a little bit different. So not only are we trying at a different time, but I'm doing a different sort of content. And we've got amazing guests teed up next week, so we'll be back with that. But if you're willing to stick with me today, the topic I want to talk about is how you can make ebooks on Canva. So one of the biggest pieces of content I make on LinkedIn are ebooks, free ebooks, where I summarize or break down a topic and then put all my learnings together in a program called Canva, which is free, an Australian startup. So I'll show you how that works. And then I put those guides out. So if you've ever scrolled through the LinkedIn, it's particularly on LinkedIn, and I know this is on Facebook too, but if you've ever scrolled through LinkedIn and seen those guides where it's like, please swipe right, and there are those multi-page decks, today I want to show you how you can create one of those. So one of the most popular things that piece of content that's been downloaded is when I've shared ideas about my calendar and how I use that. And on one of the LinkedIn Lives in the past, I walked you through the logic of it. But today I want to show you how I'll break it down and create it into a guide. So today in live time, I'm going to show you exactly how to create a guide from scratch. So this isn't a cooking show where I'm like, here's one I've created earlier. I'm just going to create it from scratch. So you're going to see the whole not so glorious creation process, but I want to step you through it. And by the end of this LinkedIn Live, this is a challenge that I've set for today. Can we create a real guide that you'll see and pop up on LinkedIn? You're like, oh, I was there when you chose that icon over that icon or that color or that font. So we'll put some fun little Easter eggs. So if you're ready to play around, let's get into it and I'll show you exactly how to do it. So the platform I'm going to use to do this today, and I'll add it into the stream, change the view, awesome, is a platform called Canva. So Canva is canva.com. So if you want to check out Canva, if you haven't already, check out Canva. That's what I'm going to use today. And whenever I go to create guides on Canva, I scroll down and I click on something called presentations. So this is kind of like Canva's free equivalent of PowerPoint, essentially. They make really, really nice guide templates for LinkedIn. So, and if you're tuning in today, if you're listening, if you're watching, jump into the comments, let me know what you're up to or what are you getting into. Shani's jumped on and said, the cookie looks great so far. Looking forward to it. Okay, I'm not sure what the cookie is so far, but we'll figure out what the cookie is. It's probably a reference to the cooking show. Thanks, Shani. So if you are tuning in, tell me what's on for your day, what's on for your Friday, what are you up to, and let's get into it. So when I create a Canva, when I click on that presentation, it actually opens it up in a new tab. So I'll stop sharing my screen just for 2 seconds and open up the new tab that's brought us into. Here we go. Wonderful. Cool. So this is what it looks like. Now there's a whole bunch of different templates that you can use. Some of the ones that you might scroll down through, there's marketing, education, pitch decks, things like that. One that I like to try around with, I've just used education. So last week I made one on education, 12 tips for studying exams. So if you saw that, if this looks familiar, if this pink tile, but instead when it was me, it said 12 tips for studying exams, this is where it comes from in Canva. So you can play with them and edit them. Whereas today though, let's use a different one. So it doesn't really matter. We're going to do one on time management. You pick any of these. Let's go with the English one. That looks kind of fun. So I'll scroll through, see what it looks like. I like the colors. They look like they'd stand out on LinkedIn. Let's use that. So if I'm doing this, now I might decide to say this is my time management ebook, which we'll see how we go creating by the end of this session, time management ebook. And it's the first page. I might change this. I don't know what Lorado York School is as a template, but it's me creating this. So by Josh. And instead of English class, which luckily this is not, only because nothing wrong with English, I just have no skills in teaching your English class, time management. And I like something that might say X tips for time management. That's a little bit big, so I might change that font size a little bit. There we go. Pop that down onto one line, and I'll change that color and remember to come back to it later. So one of the best tips I've ever got in time management, and just generally when you're creating something, is rather than overthinking what you're going to create, just start. So right now I've got something here that says X tips for time management. And I know that this is going to be an ebook or a guide that I'm going to release. If not today, maybe by the end of the weekend or early next week. Christine jumping on, Trevor going for a walk. Hi, lovely to see you. Shani, that's what you're referring to. Aditya, beautiful afternoon to you as well. So we've got our first bit. Bingo, we've got one slide already done. Now, as we go down to a second slide, you can kind of pick whatever you like. There's a couple of different ways to do it. One of the things that I really like to do is you might start an ebook off with a quote or potentially what's in it for them. So say with this second page, I've got this idea. Here we go. Let's use something like this. Cool. Now, remember to come back and change some of these notes down the bottom. So in this sense, I might just delete that because it's not relevant. But thanks for joining today's class. So what I might put in here is I might decide to put this as a quote for someone's name, something like that. And I might say insert quote here. Perfect. So I'm looking at time management. I might go, okay, well, I'm going to need some motivation on time management quotes. I'll literally Google something like time management quotes. Now, if this is a topic where I have some quotes that I go to all the time, I might use those. But today, I've just typed in time management quotes. I'll jump in. I'll read through a couple of cool quotes. Here's a cool one. So Henry David Thoreau is an author that I love. And he's got this cool quote that I've just found then. Change that size a little bit. It is not enough to be busy, so are the ants. The question is, what are we busy about? By Henry David Thoreau. Cool. So if I take something like that, put it in little quote marks, whack it down in here, and there's a nice little quote screen. Now, again, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Now, you could play around and change these icons and make them a little bit more time management focused. You could change the colors and play around. But for today, we've got the starts of an ebook. So the starting of an ebook. So firstly, cover slide. The second thing we've got is a little quote or something that'll form up a little bit of a hook. So this question, what are we busy about? And I might even go in and you could play around with that, change the color for a little bit of emphasis if you wanted, and that might form up. Oh, that color looks a bit weird. Might leave it like that. Might form up. That's what we're really going to focus on. What are we busy about? Now, for today, often when I have something like this, I'll either I might start from scratch, but normally I start from a presentation or a piece of content or something I've put out into the world that I know people are interested in. And often I've got a feeling they might want to learn more about. And that's why I'll go to the depth of making an ebook. So the piece of content that I'm basing this on is a piece of content that I shared a little bit earlier in the year. I'll see if I can get it up here. Here we go. Hopefully that's popping up for you. Cool, where I put this calendar post out earlier in the year, and it was a bit of a breakdown of an average week. And then I put out a post that said, this is how I spend my week and some things to note. Now that post had 15, 20,000 sort of views and impressions. So it's a fair indication that people are at least interested in that topic in time management, something we talk a lot about in our workshops. So I might use this today as a bit of a guide. So in here, what you might see is I've got 7 different principles that I shared in this time management post, which I'm going to turn into an ebook. So the first thing I might do is actually bring in this screenshot of the calendar and put it right in the ebook. So one of the things you can do is you can insert photos and images. So if I take us back to our Canva screen where I'm creating there, I'll jump back into Canva, and please comment, let me know, is this helpful? Is this too specific? Is this too vague? Is it way too much to do in a LinkedIn Live? We'll play around and see if it works. But if I'm back in Canva here, I might create a new page. And again, you can click down. I'll just look through. I might find a page that looks well, knowing I want to put in an image. Here we go. So I might use this third page. Delete this little thing down the bottom because I don't need it. Now in here, in Canva, you can do an upload. So what I'm going to do here is upload from the desktop. From the desktop, I'm uploading the image I want to put in. You'll see some photos in here from when we've made our previous LinkedIn Live slides. So the amazing Warren, Jesse, and Gab, who are all guests on the show this week. So there we go. I've got my calendar now in here. So this will frame up what the rest of the ebook is going to be about. So who knows what these little pins are here for? Drag this across. And so I might put in here, this is a screenshot from my calendar in February 2020. In here, it might say, check out this calendar. Something like that. Now, if I'm playing around and I'm going to put this out for the world, I might spend a little bit longer, obviously, perfecting some of the messaging in here. But for today, that'll kind of do. I'm trying to tell people what it is and why they should be interested in it. So here's this calendar. And one of the things I know from the data that I shared earlier in the year is how many hours I had accounted for. And I had 79 scheduled hours. So I might put in here, this is a screenshot from my calendar of February 2020, where I had scheduled 79 hours into my week. Perfect. There we go. So if I got something like that, I might say, okay, part of creating an ebook is definitely creating a bit of authority on the matter. So if you're going to read my ebook about time management, you might be thinking, well, who is this guy to talk to us about time management? So when I'm putting in something like this, I want to show that I do it. I have certain techniques and strategies, and there's thinking and logic behind the system. So that might be a starting point. So now I've got a little intro. Now I said X tips, so we'll get to the tips in a minute. We also said from the post, we're going to make that 7 tips for time management. So let's just narrow that in there. Let's make this ebook 7 tips for time management. Nice little quote. There's my calendar. Here's a screenshot where I had 79 scheduled hours. Scheduled 79 hours. I might make that bold, make a point out of that. And then let's get into the actual tips. So one of the things I like to do when I'm playing around with these templates is, now that I've got those first 3 pages to kind of set things up, I'll be looking for a couple of slides that could be good for tips. So if we look at something like, let's grab a nice one out of here. What do we like the look of? Like, I might honestly just pivot back and forth between these 2 slides. So for example, I might use that, and then I might use, what did I use at the top? Yep, I haven't used that yet. Awesome. So I might use this, and I might have this as tip number X. So I'll just leave that there for a second. This I'll make insert tip. And I probably don't need this 3rd level of text. So if it's a PowerPoint, you might want that little extra layer. But for me, I know that seeing as this is going to be shared primarily on LinkedIn, I want the text to be relatively big. So that's sitting there, and I might even increase the size of that text. That'll work really well. The reason I leave that blank is I'll then pivot it with this guy, and I'll switch back and forth between these. So this might be tip number X. So say tip 1, tip 2. I don't need that text. And this is going to be insert tip. Now, a few little bits of editing here. Those are both centered, so I want them to stay that way. Deleted this thing off down the bottom because I don't need that. And then I can quite quickly go through and add in these tips. Now, one of the formats you can do is you can change the style like this. So you can move different things around. So say here, I might duplicate those. Very nice. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I want 7 tips. So let's grab that again, duplicate it one more time, drag that to the end. So I'm going to have a tip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then I just need a nice, I need a nice little slide to finish on. I just lost my template there, which is okay. So that's going to load back up for me. And when that does load back up, click into English class. I'm going to pick a slide to finish on. So this one here, I'll figure out what I'm going to write there when we get to it. So as you'll see, a lot of this is setting up the structure. Now you could do an ebook on, this could be an ebook on absolutely anything. Today I've just chosen to do time management. But a big part of what I'm trying to do here is set up the framework. So I've got an opening slide, so that'll hopefully grab people's attention. I'll remember to put an arrow there later because you need to encourage people to swipe through on LinkedIn. I've then got a little quote to grab people's attention a little bit more and really narrow it in. I'm then sharing a little bit of saying, hey, this is something that we do quite regularly. And then I've got the framework set out for my tips. Now, this bit isn't necessarily the most insightful area when it goes through of just formatting it, but I want to step you through. So for myself, I've got on those 7 notes that I had, the first tip was I do this because it works for me and increases happiness, joy, and fulfillment. So tip number 1, so my idea there with time management, if I'm trying to summarize that, my first tip might be something like your calendar should not prevent you doing what you want to do. Your calendar should enable you to do what you want to do. And so the point there very much is, and I'm just going to ungroup this so I can format and move it around. Too often our calendars become our jails. And so I don't want that to happen. I don't ever want to do time management to say, I need to schedule every minute of the day. I want to use time management such that I know what my priorities are. My priorities land on the calendar. Now, I'm not sure if I mentioned priorities in any of these other points. I didn't, so I may even bring that in here. Your calendar should not prevent you doing what you want to do. Your calendar should enable you to do what you want to do. And then I might add a third point. these priorities, your priorities are reflected in what you see on your calendar form. So I might change this to your priorities. Often when I'm doing this, I'll speak it through with somebody and work through it to make sure what I'm saying actually makes sense. And then I'll play around with just a couple of little bits of editing, some things that hopefully are more visually appealing. So each of these lines are in lines of 2, so that should work. Now, one of the things I love about Calendly, one of the things I love about Canva is how easy it is to edit. So I'll make that a little bit bigger. The only problem with that is if I make that a bit bigger, I'm going to have to make the other slides bigger as well, but that's okay. So I'm working you through some of the mechanics here. So depending on time, I'll show you a couple of tips. I'd love to see if we can get a whole ebook out in this time. Loving some of these comments coming in. So Shani said, the calendar looks well organized and something I follow too, but mostly just writes it down in a notebook. Perfect. Trevor, can you touch on the context of this project? What is an ebook for LinkedIn? Cool. So Trevor, LinkedIn is a platform. Obviously, as you know, you're on LinkedIn. One of the things you can do on the LinkedIn platform is you can share ebooks. So you can share a PowerPoint slide on LinkedIn. So one of the things that we share a lot of are ebooks, which are essentially PowerPoint decks, in this case, of how you can do a particular skill. So today, the project for today is we're going to create one, and we're creating one from scratch right now that can ultimately be shared on LinkedIn and be a piece of content to share some knowledge and insights with the community. Lizzie's saying this is the kind of organization I strive for. I appreciate that. Avindra said, awesome, can translate ideas into useful material. Definitely. So the whole point of this is to make it useful. So part of this is how do you bring it to life? How do you represent it visually? And then maybe what we'll add in there to make it really actionable is an action page. So something where I might share 7 tips and then I'll put a slide on the end that says, here are the actions you can take. Cool. Let's keep pushing on. So that's tip number 1. Now, one of the things I might do here is just make this a little bit bigger to start with, and that way I won't have to edit everything later. Tip number 2, if I go over to my calendar. Tip number 2, measuring is not enough. You need to manage it. Perfect. So the tip in here might be, I'm just going to ungroup this. Tip number 2 bit might be, you can't manage what you don't measure. And that's a Peter Drucker quote. I might just give the attribution there. That's Peter Drucker. I believe it's Peter Drucker. This is a good example. Let's just double check that quote in Google. I think it's Peter Drucker. Can't manage what you don't measure. Let's bring it up. Yeah, that's a Peter Drucker quote. Beautiful. So just got the attribution there. So what I might add below that is to say, when you use your calendar, at the end of the week, add up how many hours you spend in each category, e.g. study, exercise, work, and ask yourself if this is enough. What's more poetic than that? If this is too little, too much, or just the right amount of time. Okay, so we're going to reduce that font size because it's a little bit big. Pop it in. And you know what? Because we've got the quote at the start, I might even pull that quote out and just leave that at the same size just for the sake of editing there. So let's pull that guy out. Now, if you're like, am I watching a live stream of Josh doing work? Yes, that's exactly what you're doing right now. So if this is not up your alley, then that's totally fine. But it might be. And I was speaking to a friend the other day, or yesterday actually, I bumped into him on the tram, and he said, it's really interesting. Some people's wind down routine at the end of the day, apparently, I didn't know this, maybe you don't either, is to go on YouTube and watch other people's end of day wind down. So your lunch break might be watching a video of someone having a lunch break, or your idea of work in the morning might be watching somebody do work. It's really, really strange. And I say that affectionately because, I mean, my idea of sometimes getting motivation is watching a motivational video. So is that any different? I don't know. But today, I want to show you exactly how I do this, demystify it, remove all the barriers, and then show you how you can do it too. So the second tip, when you're using your calendar, when you use your calendar at the end of the week, add up how many hours you spend in each category and ask yourself, make this a little bit more grammatically correct. That's the question you're actually asking yourself. I might bold that guy. End of the week, a little bit of emphasis there because that's when I do it. Perfect. And we've got 2 tips just like that. Now, as I often do, is I'll go through and I'll make a system, and then I'll realize that I've changed my system, and I'll go back and flip it around a little bit. So here, as we've got those 2 tips, tip 1, 2, 3, I might then duplicate those. Whoops. Let's duplicate this guy one more time. I'm going to have to duplicate that twice more, actually. This one once more, and this one once more again. And now I'm just going to shuffle them around. Tip 1 into tip 2. It's a little bit delayed because I'm live streaming it, so we'll play around with that. The tech is awesome once you do use it. There we go. Cool. So 1, 2. Now, so just so I don't get confused, because I'm prone to getting confused sometime, I might go through and just change these tips. Make that tip number 3. X. It's going to be tip number 4. Whoops. Tip number 4. Be X. Now, for the sake of today, 5 sounds like a nice number. We don't necessarily need 7 tips. So let's just get rid of that, and we'll change this at the start so we don't spend the whole live stream you watching me put in tips. Now, let's pull out a couple more. So I shared, and again, it's really important that I show you the process here. So for me, when I'm doing this and working through it and stepping through piece by piece, I want to really show you why I'm doing it. So Trevor said, would we create these out of personal interest, teaching so you learn, or reach a broader audience? Definitely. So Trevor, this is for me to reach an audience. So I know this stuff. It's my calendar. I know how it works, but I'm putting these into ebooks so I can share them with other people and they can learn from those tips and tricks. Now, a lot of the learning we do takes place in workshops, but this is like a freebie that we give out to the community to say, hey, if this is interesting to you, here's a couple of things that you might be able to learn. So when we did it last week, we did 12 tips and tricks for study and exams. And so it was 12 different tactics and techniques that people could use to make the most of their exams. So yeah, very much to give away and to send out to people. These are great too from a business perspective. We always attach them to emails and send them to students who come to our workshops as a chance for them to reinforce and apply the learning. All right, so one of the things I wanted to share with you was that where it's all kind of coming from. So I said in the guide we had a couple of points. So here I've got 7. So if I'm going to cut it down to 5 for the sake of today, let's pick 3 more. So the travel one's less relevant because I'm not traveling anymore because of COVID at the moment. If it's scheduled, it's done. I like that. I might use that. Deleting apps, maybe. I limit it. Oh, the 60-second rule for news scrolling I like, and notifications. Okay, cool. So let's talk about getting rid of distractions. So I might do removing notifications. That's a good one. Limiting the scroll in the news feed, and I'll see what jumps out third as our next point. So I'll stop sharing there and go back to sharing the actual ebook. Here we go, 5 tips for time management. Check it out, use your priorities, figure out if you're using enough time. Tip 3, looking at this might be, if it's scheduled, it's done. Scheduled, it's done. So for me, the point of that, and the reason I put that in an ebook, is to say, if you want to achieve something, make sure it's represented in your calendar. Now, is that too similar from the first point? Scheduling your priorities? Maybe. I might change that around. Let's make this, let's go 60-second rule. I like that. 60-second rule, scrolling. So I have a rule that says if I catch myself scrolling through the infinite news feed, say to myself, 60 seconds left. After 60 seconds, I stop and close the app. So for me, the idea here is knowing that lots of people might spend a bit of time scrolling through the newsfeed, which is totally fine, but I know if I catch myself scrolling, it's a distraction. So I'm going to have in there that 60-second rule means if you find yourself scrolling and you catch yourself in the process, you go, okay, 60 seconds left. And after 60 seconds, you stop whatever you do. Sometimes I'll find myself 15 minutes later and I'm still scrolling. So this is a way of me catching myself. Another way I do that sometimes is I do like, if there's not a life-changing post in the next 5. So as I scroll down, I'm like, all right, that's one more post, 2 more posts, 3 more posts, 4 more posts, 5 more posts. And if there's nothing life-changing those 5 posts, I'll quit out of the app. Now, often I'm like, but maybe the 6th post is where the secret lies. And I know that's the addictive behavior of me being stuck on a platform. So it's really helpful for me using those 60 seconds or using those next 5 posts to quit out. Now, as I go down, I might do tip 4. So this is where it's like, this is work at the end of the day. And often when I create these guides, they'll take me from an hour to an hour and a half. And so I'll put a fair bit of time into making them. I've almost always done some prep work and got some resources provided, but today we'll do them quite quickly. So here, let's have the notifications. That'll be a good one. Tip 4 might be turn off notifications. Notifications. Whether it's for study or work, turning off notifications on your phone can be a great way to get hours back in the day. So there's a concept called attention residue. And the idea there is that if you're switching between tasks all the time, your attention's sort of sticking on the previous task. So by turning off notifications, you're distracted less, you're taken away from your work less, and you can stay focused on exactly what you're doing. So that might be tip number 4, tip number 3, tip number 1, and then I need a 5th tip for time management. So if I'm going back to the post that I used before, and if I go back to my calendar, maybe for a little bit of inspiration, and if I think that's, yeah, I've popped that in here. So I'm scrolling up, I'm looking at my calendar, and I'd say, really, what are the principles in here for time management? So I might focus on doing the most important things first. So my 5th tip might be identify the most productive time of day. Schedule in your most important activity into that time. Focus intently for a minimum of 1 hour on that task. That's kind of a 3-pronged approach there. The idea there is we have a rule called like the 60 in 1, where you take 60 minutes for your number 1 priority in the day. So here is, this is asking people to focus in on their most productive time of day. Most productive time is the key bit there. Most important activity is the key bit there. Focus intently for a minimum of 1 hour on that task. Key point there. Awesome. Now, we're doing this super quickly, but principles remain. 5 tips, and then we get to that last page. I said I'd add in an action page. I'll do that in a second. Might be this final page, though, is sort of a conclusion slide. So if people are watching, or if they're not watching, if they're reading through news, the LinkedIn feed, or they download it, because you can download all these guides off LinkedIn. It's a feature of the platform. You go full screen, you can download any guides. So if you've seen that already, if you've seen people put guides up, hit full screen, you can download it, keep it for yourself, for your own learning. But for this, I always want an end slide so people know they're at the end of it. So I might say, thank you for reading. And then down below, if people want to reach out, because often lots of 2nd and 3rd degree connections will see this, I'll say, if I can ever help you, your students, or your teams with time management, please reach out to me via josh@campusconsultancy.org. Cool. Nice little message in there. Just make sure I'm accessible if anyone's interested in anything that we do. Perfect, perfect, perfect. There it is. And so the last thing we want to add onto here is an action page. So we've got a summary of today's class. So what if we did that? Do I like that? I like changing the colors. Let's do this. So let's look at actions for today. So I might have action number 1. This can be action number 2, and this can be action number 3. So in here, if people are doing time management, and I'm thinking, well, how do they actually go and apply this in their life? I'm like, this is all well and good, but I want to make sure people actually apply this. It's all well and good to read an ebook, but it's very different to actually get the result in your life. And so from a learning and a pedagogy standpoint, you always want to make sure that learning comes first. Have you understood it? Is it simple? Is it clear? And hopefully they've enjoyed the experience. But then how do they go out and apply it to make sure they get the outputs and the outcomes, internal and external? So action number 1 Here I might say, and I'm just going to ungroup these for a second because I know I'm going to change that font and make it bigger. Action number 1 might be download Google Calendar and track your time for the next week. Every week has 168 hours. How do you spend yours? So I like in the actions to often put questions in there. It's a little bit more personal. It's a little bit more curious rather than like, just do this. And that can sometimes, at least to me, seem a little bit impersonal. So we've got those two. I sort of like that font size. So often, as you've seen, I do one thing and then have to redo it. It's nature of the beast. So let's have that in there. Slide in that second action. Pop a third one in here. And again, some of the images, you're like, oh, those are most appropriate images. They're kind of just there. At this point now, you can change them and make them more applicable. But today, they look good. It makes the design look kind of good. And so that's enough for me at this point. Now, I don't want you to think that we don't put the time and effort into making really thorough guides. Again, they're all free. But for today, we just want to make sure it's really simple and you can see the process. So step number 1 might be download Google Calendar, track your time for the next week. Every week have 168 hours, 24 times 7. How do you spend those hours? Action number 2, define your top 3 goals for next week and schedule them in for at least 1 hour of work per day at your peak working time. So whatever time you do your best work. And the third one, you've managed your hours, you've scheduled in the number 1 goal. That third one could be turn off the notifications. Can you go for 1 week with no notifications turned on for social media? Notifications. Check Josh's spelling. Oh, I made the same spelling mistake twice. Shocking, I know. Can you go 1 week with no notifications turned on social media? Bang. So what we've got there is 5 tips. We've got 3 actions to apply. We've got a thank you slide. And if we pull it out like this, what that lands us with is an ebook beginning to end that if you saved it and put it out, hopefully it would be helpful. But also we've made that in live time with no preparation in 32 minutes. So the key with this is one of the things that we always want to make sure we're doing is making sure these are actually really, really valuable. So when we're putting these out, we'll add in a bunch of research. We'll go and find studies. We'll add in slides from our workshops, personal experiences, stories. Sometimes we'll interview students, have the student voice in there, which I absolutely love. But one of the things we want to make sure is if people are scrolling through the newsfeed, part of this is a pattern interrupt. So the reason I put actions in there is to say, if I've caught someone's attention and they're scrolling through, and then there's something in the ebook that says, hey, maybe scrolling through isn't a good piece of time, that action that says, I'm going to turn my notifications off, I'm not going to be distracted. Hopefully that grabs someone's attention and pulls them more in a direction where they can focus on what they really care about. So these ebooks, and as we put them out, hopefully are helping people move in the direction towards achieving those goals that they want, becoming clear on them, and scheduling the time into their calendar. Trev said, ebooks are a great insight. For most students, perhaps a method of advertising yourself and constructing goals. Cool. So Trevor, I'm not exactly sure what you mean there, but shoot me a message, let me know. And if there's ever future content that we can put out about that, we'd love to. Also, we have a goal setting ebook that we have put out. It's on our website. If you go to the website and click in resources, there's a goal setting tab there from a previous guide that we put out. So feel free to go check that out and download it. Now, the last thing I said I was going to do is one of the first things when you're putting out anything on LinkedIn, especially if it's a guide where you need people to swipe, is to make sure they know that. So with this, the reason why I have 5 tips for time management on the front is obviously there's not 5 tips on that first slide. So that should indicate that there's more to come. But the other thing that's really popular, you'll always see this on LinkedIn or on guides, is you'll see people put in an arrow to indicate you can swipe to the right. Now, this is sort of irrelevant when people download the PDF because it's underneath as the flow of PDF is top to bottom, but LinkedIn is left to right. So when I'm doing this, there's a couple of really fun arrows on Canva that I like to use. So say we're to use something that jumps out a little bit. Let's put in this. And even though that's a little bit distracting, let's go with this. I like this one. Put that guy in on the side, and that should hopefully indicate that you swipe to find out more. You could write a little like swipe to find out more, but at least that's there and showing. Hopefully, if people see that in the newsfeed, they'll understand that that means to swipe to the right. Now with that, that's essentially it. If I was to download this, I hit download. I could jump into here and download it as individual images, or I could just download it as a PDF. And with some of these tiles, they can be pretty big files. So I'll use something called Small PDF. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, ilovepdf.com, and it will compress the slide size down. That helps me send it out in emails or send it to workshop participants in a follow-up. But today, if I was to hit Small PDF, download that, 10 pages, you could go in and add a logo and add all sorts of different description if you really, really wanted. But I hit download, nice little motivational quote there. Canva prepares my design. And what started off half an hour ago is a completely blank document and a LinkedIn post, because I know that LinkedIn post got attention. I'll go to the effort of breaking it down into an ebook and give a little bit more detail. So that's downloaded as a PDF. And if I was to open up that PDF now, I'll open it up, stop sharing my screen, and you can see what we've created together. So I'll share this with you here. If I go over into my application window, oh no, it's opened up in Chrome, but that's totally fine. Time management ebook, there it is. 5 tips for time management by me. If you scroll down, there's a nice little quote. Here's my calendar, check it out. Here's tip number 1, tip number 2, tip number 3, tip number 4, tip number 5. I'm sure there might be a spelling error somewhere in there, but that's okay. Actions for today, action 1, action 2, action 3, and thanks for reading. So just like that, we've gone from absolutely nothing to creating a guide. Now, your questions. Could this be a better guide? Yes, it totally could. Does it have to be the perfect guide to be valuable? No. Better is better than best. So when we're putting out guides, we want to make sure that we're putting out things that add some value, but it doesn't have to be perfect. This isn't something like I'm not writing a whole book on this and getting a professional deal. The fact that I can do this for free, put it out to the world, if it helps 1, 2, or 3 people with 10,500 people who follow the LinkedIn account, which I'm very grateful for, if it helps a few people and it takes half an hour, that's normally a pretty good use of time. Now, for me, when I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about my time, 1, I really enjoy it. So I do things that I really enjoy, just like the first tip in the guide. I like making these guides. It helps me think and helps me reflect and be creative. The second thing is I'll put it at a time of day where I'm not as productive. So whether it's, say, right now from 1:30 until 2:15 in the afternoon on a Friday, like I'm sure there are lots of people who, and I was one of them for a long time working, when that time wasn't very productive. And so if I can create something at that time, it gets my mind going. And we've got a workshop at 3 o'clock, so I've got plenty of time to prepare before that when I'm on and when I'm actually presenting. The third thing I'll be looking at there, and very much akin with the tips in the ebook, first tip being doing something you love. Second thing, figuring out when you're actually going to do it, is instead of scrolling, which would be so easy, that 60-second scrolling rule, instead of scrolling, I'm spending my time creating. So I'm not consuming as much as I am creating. I spend very little time now actually scrolling through LinkedIn. I'll check out a couple of different hashtags, key people I really like to keep up with, but I don't spend as much time taking it in because I've got a lot of stuff and ideas that I want to get out. And the more time I put into actually creating things, it's probably net even the amount of time I might spend scrolling, but this is me contributing. So create and contribute rather than consume would be my guide there. So for today, if this is interesting for you, if you've never done this before, if you've never made a guide, it doesn't have to be something you share publicly on LinkedIn. You could do this for your study notes. You could do this for your community. You could use this as a way to do a handover in a club or a team or a society. Or you could just do it because it's a cool way to capture a moment in time, something you've been working on, something that you're interested in. If you're a student, you can create these sorts of things and send them through to an employer. Attach it as a PDF or as a hyperlink. And if you're applying for a marketing role and you've made a marketing deck, or if you know that they have a certain sort of clientele and you're like, here's the 5 steps I'd take to bring this project to life, you're going above and beyond in a way that 1 in 1,000 applicants will. And if you do that, you'll stand out. So today I wanted to show you the mechanics of it. We've also made a nice little ebook. Keep an eye out for that. And I might touch it up over the weekend, or on Monday I might say, here's this ebook we put out. It's a first draft. And you'll be able to see the reactions that people get. And if you're watching the live stream right now, fantastic. Or if you're watching this later on YouTube or on the replay on LinkedIn or Facebook, awesome. But you'll also be able to see in that post how people will comment below and they'll say, oh, that tip really helped me. Or, oh, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that before. Or I've been waiting for a calendar. I'm going to use Google Calendar. And when you see those comments, you'll see like these things really help real people in real time. And that's the whole reason we do it. So with that, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being with me as we created an ebook all together on Canva. you're curious about the platform, canva.com is Canva. They're absolutely amazing. I use them for all of our digital design. And for the longest time, I used just the free version as well, which was absolutely brilliant. So I really recommend checking them out. But it's also $2.17 on a Friday. So if you're watching in Australia at least. So I hope, and Trevor saying the end section was what I asked about before. Thanks so much. Awesome, Trevor. Cool. So I hope today was interesting. I hope you learned something new, and I'd love to see it. So Lizzie, Trevor, Christine, Avinda, Ashani, Aditya, if you tuned in today, I'd love to see a guide. Make that first guide, put it out, even if it's five things about Ashani that you didn't know, and create it and put it out on LinkedIn, and it'll just be something new and different. Another great use of this is I'd use this when I read books. So a lot of the time I'll read books, I'll take my highlights, and then I'll put them into one of these guides and share it. And that way I can share the things I'm learning from the reading that I'm doing, but also doing it in a creative way, which for whatever reason helps reinforce the learning for me. So with that, thank you very much for joining today. Oh, Pete Crowley, small world. Mate, how are you? It's very, very good to see you. You'll see more LinkedIn Lives. Pete, we'll have to jump on and have a chat later. Geez, that was a while ago. 7 years ago, I worked with Pete, which is beautiful times. Hope the family's well, Pete, as well. So if you tuned in today, thank you for joining us. Before I get surprised by other amazing people who are going to jump on, I will leave you to it. We've got a session at 3. And if you are watching this right now and you're an international student living in Melbourne, our session at 3 is all around design thinking, how you can find a real problem and create and ideate a new solution. So if that's up your alley, and we would love to see you join us there. And if not, we will see you next week with episode number 45 of Coffee with Campus Consultancy, kicking off on Monday as we're getting close to episode 50. If there's anything you'd like to see, if you'd like me to talk about, run through, give you an insight on, run a guide on, please comment, send me a message, anything like that. Peter Crowley, all good, 3 kids now. I love it. I love it. Well, there's no parenting advice from someone who doesn't have kids, but not that you'd need that from me, Pete. Maybe I'll turn to you and seek some advice from you someday in the future. Divya, thanks for that very much. I really, really appreciate that. And if you're listening, have an amazing Friday afternoon. I will see you soon, and keep an eye out for that guide. And when you do, know that you were here when it was created. Have a great weekend, and I'll speak with you soon. Bye all.